Gary Burton's artwork, I mean, was it a little different than some of the other people's?
Well, and I wouldn't say different, but what Gary did was, first of all, he was one of the first guys to not work for a record company. He was independent, and he aligned himself with the artists. He was friends with Buffalo Springfield, and all these guys trusted him. And so when he did a cover, it was coming from the group, so the executives were less likely to complain or to try to make changes, because if Neil Young says that's the cover, that was the cover. Mm-hmm. So Gary had a relationship with those guys, and he's a very soft-spoken guy. But I asked him, what inspired him, and he said, well, he loved the music, and he would listen to the music. And he said when he listens to the music, images occur, and then he tried really hard to get the feeling of the sound of the music into the imagery. And I think he did a good job of that.
He did that so amazingly, yeah. And he worked quite often with Henry Diltz, who some of us know, and is a common, did the Crosby, Stills, Nash first album cover, and the Doors, Morrison Hotel, and a lot of things. Right. So they were sort of a team, and so there was great photography there too. Yeah. And then there was Mike Salisbury, who's another graphic designer. Tell us a little bit about him.
Well, we spoke to Mike, and Mike's done a lot of things. He's had an amazing career beyond Billboards, but in that period he was living in Laurel Canyon. And the main reason I wanted to talk to Mike was because he did some amazing Randy Newman billboards, and including I think it's called Born Again. It's a famous one where Randy spoofs Kiss. So he had himself made up with Kiss makeup, and instead of the other thing, he had dollar signs over his eyes, and he's sticking his tongue out. And so he had some great stories to tell about that. He also did Little Criminals, and the one that has I Love L.A. I forget the title of the album now, but he did all the great Randy Newman covers.
Little Criminals.
Great billboards.
Yeah. He's standing in front of over the Hollywood freeway.
Yes,
or
the
something.
overpass in the freeway.
Mike Salisbury also, some of you may remember the Los Angeles Times used to have a magazine supplement in the 60s from 66 to 72 called West, which was wonderfully designed. And Mike was the guy behind all the design.
He was the art director for that.
On West, yeah. So and was at Surfer before that. And speaking of Surfer magazine, also John Van Hammersveld was another designer. He did the Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street.
Right, Rick Griffin.
And he worked with Rick Griffin.
Yeah, well, you're talking about Surfer magazine.
Oh yeah, Rick Griffin, Van Hammersveld, Salisbury, all those guys.
John Van Hammersveld also did a lot of things, but the album cover we picked out for him was the Exile on Main Street, because the album cover, if you know it, it's a melange of all these little black and white photographs, and it looks like circus freaks. It's actually one photograph done by Robert Frank, I think, in a tattoo parlor. So it didn't translate easily to a billboard, because billboards, to be successful, need like a strong central image. And here you had all these little pictures. So John told us how he meticulously picked a couple characters out that he thought represented the Rolling Stones. If you look at the billboard, you see it's a little bit of a stretch, but he pulled out like 4 or 5 and blew them up big and then colored them, and it's one of the more really fascinating billboards.
It's a great billboard. And the Rolling Stones also had the most controversial Sunset Strip billboard.
That's true.
It was the album called Black and Blue, and for Black and Blue they had an S&M based theme. Let us know about that, because you were in Rolling Stone because of that.
Yeah, the album cover was shot by a fashion designer. I think his name is Hero, and it's this really nice color image. It's a gatefold album, so when you spread it out, it's the 5 heads of the Rolling Stones, and then you see the ocean behind them. But for the billboard, they had, and I still haven't figured out exactly who did that artwork, but it's an image of a woman whose hands are tied.
Her hands are tied.
Hands are tied,
yeah.
And she's clearly been beaten. She's got black and blue marks on her, and the big logo on the billboard is black and blue by the Rolling Stones, and I love it. So a women's group immediately protested it. There was graffiti. I was by there that day, and I had a black and white film in my camera, because back then you had to choose between black and white and color, and so I happened to get a picture of it in black and white. The idea was that I'd come back later with some Kodachrome's color film, and by the time I got back it was gone, because the protests were so loud, and deservedly, and it was taken down about 2 days after it went up.